Welcome back to the JPS podcast, and in this episode I am honoured to have the people-punching peacock, Triple P as I call him, my man from the University of Western Australia, Jackson Peos, back on the show. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Jackson, he is a PhD candidate in exercise physiology, competitive bodybuilder, and online physique coach. And he directed the first randomised control trial investigating the effects of intermittent caloric restriction versus continuous caloric restriction dieting methods on fat loss, muscle retention, and muscle performance in resistance trained athletes, alongside the likes of Lane Norton, Eric Helms, and Andy Galpin. So he's a very intelligent dude. And in this episode, we discuss some of the recent controversies surrounding an article Jackson published on the JPS blog, debunking some of the pseudoscience of a popular supplement company and their products, ATP Science. To give some context to the start of this podcast, Jackson's article received a significant amount of attention and was brought to the attention of those higher up at ATP Science. And after this article and many of the backlash and support that he got, he looked to begin raising funds through crowdfunding for a study investigating the efficacy of one of the more popular supplements, a fat loss cream made by ATP Science, to assess whether the claims they make are indeed supported by the scientific investigation that he would conduct. And ATP have since protested this study and contacted the university directly, trying to shut down Jackson's pursuit of investigating this product. And Jackson's University have since been concerned with potential legal consequences and action that could be made if the study goes ahead. And Jackson is here to talk all about it, what's happened, why he feels that addressing supplement companies' claims with the products that they make is indeed noble and warranted endeavor, and how he is going to go about pursuing this study and furthering the investigation of the products made by ATP Science. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Sit back, relax, and have fun. Waiting game, but she's doing right. She's in good spirits. How are you?
Lucky she's tougher than you, eh?
Fucking oath. Lucky she takes after her mum. How are you?
No,
Still
good.
in love?
Fuck man, this ATP stuff's getting out of control though, honestly.
Really?
So,
This is going to be on the air.
Is it?
FYI. Yeah, so have at it.
I bet it. We probably got to be careful then.
Yeah.
Do you want?
No, go. Unleash.
No, I'm serious, man. Like the uni are like dropping the hammer with the legal stuff. So
well,
I probably can't say everything live that I'd otherwise say to you.
Tell me.
Okay. So last week they called the uni. Pretty much complaining about the trial, saying that
nicotine gum in double dropping. Good man.
Yeah, but they're 2 mgs, aren't they?
They are.
So they've called the uni. So all that I'd done was open the GoFundMe page to start like raising the funds for it, and I talked a little bit about it, but not the specifics. Like I hadn't advertised recruitment, hadn't gone any further with that. And so they've called the university last week to pretty much try and deter the trial and say that it's unauthorized and that I've been bad-mouthing them on social media, like derogatory terms and things like that. And then and that was based – and so they followed me on social media because they've got screenshots, and they were screenshotting the thing that I said, that ATP called my university today trying to get the study deterred. And then so the university's come back with me saying, it's tough because they've gone all the way up to the dean of the university, which is the dean doesn't deal with anything unless it's freaking massive. It doesn't deal with anything on the ground. And he was pretty much, obviously he hasn't heard my side of it all. And the thing that I can think is that Matt and the other guy, they're pretty smart dudes, and they're probably crafted a pretty clever story that paints me in a pretty bad light. So the university, they were quite harsh, and they said stop everything. We don't know how far this has gone. But it sounds like you're breaking legal code and things like that. So I had to like get straight back on them and explain what had happened, and that like no steps of the trial had been taken. We were only in like the fundraising stage, and I'd contact the finance people to make sure that the funds, like, because crowdfunding is not a normal way to raise funds, but it can still happen to do trials, just to make sure it's handled all appropriately, and that like nothing would have gone further until we'd like got appropriate ethical approval and everything like that. And so it seemed like, okay, I'd explained my story, it was all good. And then today, like, I've got another call from my supervisor saying that like they'd been like pulling screenshots from like a while back, even when I was just talking about like their subcut products and how I didn't think they'd work and things like that. And it's so frustrating because like literally like that's. And I explained to my supervisor who taught us a unit in third year of like good, corrupted and bogus science. And he literally taught us the techniques of like how to identify pseudoscience. And one of our projects was like find a supplement, review it, and like work out whether it was good or bullshit. And I was like, what I've done, like, and the uni had hold of the article that I wrote for JPS, and they sent that back to me as well. Like, oh, we saw this as well. And I was like, what I've done is exactly the same. I use the same techniques that you taught me, and I did the same project that you got us to do in third year. So it's swirling around, and like pretty much they've just said like we don't know what's going on yet, so stop what you're doing now. Like make sure no funds have gone out. And I was like, yes, I haven't taken any funds. It's all just sitting in a fundraiser account, like in escrow. But and then like the university have got this other legal guy, and he's like, anything you say has to be like separate from the university. You can't be tying the university into your comments, like, which I haven't been. I haven't been like, oh, university is affiliated with the comment, my opinion. Like, I haven't said anything like that. I've tried to keep it like pretty personal and like, this is my opinion on their products based on the review of the science. But it's hard because like we're going through emails with different people, like, and like I feel like I just need to sit in front of these guys and like have a proper discussion with them, because at the moment I'm dealing with like literally 4 or 5 different people who like they're like, and the problem with the legal people is like they're not scientists, like they don't like. So they're probably not fully like the only thing that they care about is trying to cover their asses. So they're probably not fully appreciating my side and my motive for like trying to do something and trying to debunk pseudoscience. They're probably like, why the fuck would you even care about that stuff? So what the worst case scenario would be that the legal guys say like, okay, well, you haven't really done anything technically wrong, but like, this study is not that important to us, so it's easier for us to just shut it down, just to prevent any small chance of a lawsuit or something like that. And if they do that, if they can't give me a legitimate reason to say you did this wrong, like here's the code of conduct, you broke that code or something like that. If they can't do that, man, like I'll go to the media or something, I reckon, because like, this is crazy. Like this is like corporate bullying. Like they're a big company and they're scaring the university and their legal guys. It's like, it's so wrong. It's so frustrating. Yeah. So that's what I've been dealing with the last few days. But
awesome.
It's just wild. Yeah.
Well, I can't even fathom. That's super interesting, and I guess it all sort of started with an article idea we had back in Perth. I think it was in March.
While eating some noodles.
Yeah, I was new. So to bring the listeners who are probably unfamiliar with what the hell we're talking about now, to bring them up to speed, do you want to discuss, I guess, before the article, why you felt, the need to sort of debunk the pseudoscience surrounding, this supplement and this supplement company, then what you covered in that article, and then that will essentially bring us right up to where we are today.
Yeah, okay. So I think the motive for the article itself originated from a couple of reasons. One, that consumers are confused, and one, that they're frustrated in the fact that these big supplement companies who are pushing out these new products, new product blend, new product blends with various ingredients, and they're making these extraordinary claims, borderline on selling miracle cures, so fat loss, muscle gain, sort of cure-all products. These companies are making these extraordinary statements with very little scientific backing, and I think the consumers are frustrated because these companies aren't really being checked on sort of the claims and statements that they're making. They're sort of able to sort of make these statements freely without anyone sort of reviewing them. So I'd heard a little bit about sort of the ATP science products, and so a couple of people on Instagram might send me their product and say, "Oh, what do you think about this? It sounds great, but do you think it works?" And that's sort of happened for a couple of months. And then I thought, right, well, a lot of people are clearly interested in this company. A lot of people are clearly buying the products. It's probably worth me sort of having a deeper look into these products and the ingredients in the products to see sort of, are these claims standing up to the evidence or the body of literature. So that was the original motivation for the article. And in the article, I chose sort of 4 of their main products. And the difficulty with sort of analysing these products is they're not single ingredient products. It's not like a creatine monohydrate or something like that. They might have 6 or 7 sort of active ingredients that are supposed to be effective or provide benefits. Now, with sort of, I think I reviewed 4 of their key products, and some of the ingredients that were supposed to sort of have these miraculous benefits, some of the ingredients I wasn't even familiar with. So instead of sort of looking at the product itself, because obviously subcut cream with 6 ingredients hasn't been tested in the clinical trial, so all we can really do is look at the individual active ingredients in the product and say, okay, is there any evidential backing behind the ingredients itself? And sort of the deeper I looked into it, I sort of found that the ingredients used in these products, and we don't even know sort of what the dosages, or if they're even effective dosages, because they're proprietary blends, that the exact doses aren't listed. But in terms of the ingredients itself, I found that most of the claims were based on extremely weak evidence, conflicting evidence, or just no evidence whatsoever. And I made that quite clear in the article, and I raised some issues around sort of their collagen protein, where they'd made statements about their no whey protein having superior muscle growth effects compared to whey protein. Now, the issues I have with that is that they've referenced a study that was supposedly completed in 2014 or 2015. There was a bunch of studies. None of them have been published, and I can't seem to find any reference to these studies on the university database anywhere. But my main issue is the findings that they're the findings that they're listing sort of on their product labels or in their product descriptions, where they're showing sort of superior benefits to their collagen versus whey, are completely contradictive to sort of the other studies that we have on collagen versus whey protein and other protein sources. Now, ATP did a response podcast, and they sort of said that no, the study exists, and they sort of passed off the blame a little bit and said, oh, it wasn't our fault that the study wasn't published. It was sort of the people who are running the study, their fault, and that might well be true, but I still have doubts about that study, just because sort of their findings are sort of, they don't line up with the other research that we have on collagen protein. And some of the other issues I raised were sort of in relation to their subcut cream and some of the herbs used in there. They just don't seem to sort of have any real marked fat loss effects. And the International Olympic Committee came out and said sort of some of these ingredients like Coleus forscola or forskolin, there's not enough research for us to be able to recommend it as a weight loss product. And there's just a lot of, the conclusions that I came was that there's a lot of doubt surrounding a lot of these products. They may well work, they might work, but if I had to put my money, whether it was sort of marked benefits and that the claims that ATP Science are making out about these products are justified, if I put my money on it, I'd say it's unlikely that the sort of that the results are going to line up with the claims that they're making, and that sort of planted a seed in sort of my mind and a few others that were sort of listening to the podcast and following the articles and things like that, and said, well, why don't you run a study? Why don't you do a study on one of ATP's products? And I initially said if ATP Science were willing to fund a study, like I'd happily run it in my lab, and they could suggest a product that they want to test or something like that, and we do a double-blind randomized controlled trial. So it was a really tight study. But they didn't really come back with me on. They didn't really respond to that. So then a few guys hit me up and said, well, hey, like we're frustrated with these companies making these extraordinary claims that sort of haven't been shown in the science. Well, I'd be happy to put a bit of money to sort of to fund a study like this. And I thought, well, if the consumers are sort of that passionate about sort of companies potentially peddling pseudoscience, if people are frustrated enough to be able to put money, then, well, I'm in a position where I'm able to help out, and I'm able to sort of contribute to not only the fitness industry, but also able to sort of help consumers. And if we were able to do a study and let's just say that perhaps one of their products sort of didn't show the sort of these remarkable benefits that they're showing on the label, well, that would encourage sort of a lot more ethical behavior by supplement companies, because all of a sudden they think, okay, well, we need to be a little bit more careful with what we're saying, because we don't know if our products are going to be tested or things like that. And another thing that it would do is it's going to encourage, and this would probably be the main benefit, it would encourage a lot more critical thinking by the consumers, and they wouldn't just accept these claims that these supplement companies are saying on face value. They'd be a little bit more analytical, and they'd think, well, it's all great that they say that this product's going to have crazy fat loss benefits, but how about I actually just do a quick look into the ingredients and see, okay, well, is it likely that it's actually, is there any evidence behind these products and ingredients? So yeah, that's pretty much where we're at. So we're trying to get the study underway. There's been a few little roadblocks. Obviously, like ATP Science have accused me of being a little bit derogatory towards them, and I think that's unfair, because my statements that I've made sort of towards the company has never been personal. It's been purely based on review of the literature, and yes, it's opinionated, but I think that my opinions are justified with evidence and product. For the company, I've purely just targeted on the products, and anything I've said about the products is always existed, and I think I've made evidence-based statements. So they'd have a tough case. Well, I find it unfair that they'd call some of my things sort of defamatory or derogatory, because I don't think that's the case. I think I'm just a scientist at heart, and I'm evaluating a claim, and it's my opinion that a lot of the claims aren't sort of lining up with the science. So still trying to push through with the study. I'm not sure whether they want the study to happen or not. I do get the impression that perhaps they don't want the study to happen, just from that they've been sort of contacting a few people with some doubts and some criticisms of me. But I'm in meetings. I'm discussing. I'm in meetings and having a lot of email threads with some of the legal teams involved at the university to make sure everything's legit. We're following the code of conduct. Even the funds are being handled correctly from a crowdfunding standpoint. That we're following due process. So we're making sure we're working towards it. And certainly the study's still alive. We just need to make sure whenever you're doing a study with a big corporations involved that have a lot of money, you really got to make sure everything's tight. So I think that's what the university's concern is just make sure everything's done by the letter, and that we're not overstepping our bounds with anything like that. So that's where we're at the moment.
Yeah, very cool. And for the listeners, the the article that Jackson wrote, sort of debunking some of the claims made by ATP Science, will be linked in the description box below. So we implore you to check that out and come to your own informed opinion as to whether or not Jackson was derogatory. And yeah, in my opinion, I thought you went about it quite well. We obviously had our legal team look over things before we published it, because we were obviously concerned with potential backlash that might unfold with this type of article. But yeah, to be honest, I think it was handled really well. I think you wrote quite objectively and assessed the claims, evaluated them, and obviously used quite a critical lens to portray your opinions, which are, in my opinion, quite well established in science, and it unfortunately led to exposing the claims that they make to be somewhat fallacious, and I guess not supported by the science that they were using. So to get into that specifically, do you want to sort of address the claims made by some of their products, and then I guess the pseudoscience identifying strategies that you outlined, and then some of the problems you found when investigating the claims that they made?
Yeah, so some of the sort of characteristics of pseudoscience itself, one of the ones is that with generally someone that's sort of peddling pseudoscience, they'll tend to focus on the fringes of evidence. So an example of that would be sort of promoting sort of ingredients or products that sort of are very front edge or new, and that they're enticing because they seem new and exciting. But the problem with that is because they're so new, there's just a lack of evidence on them. And like I said before, there was a few ingredients in these products that I'd never heard of. And coming from someone that sort of is completing their PhD in nutritional sciences, for me not to know sort of some of these nutritional supplements is a little bit of a red flag. Like, I don't say that from a point of arrogance. It's just I keep extremely up to date with sort of statements by the International Olympic Committee on their supplements, and ones that they think sort of have merit, don't have merit, or sort of we don't know yet. And yeah, it was quite clear that one of ATP's strategies that works quite effectively to draw customers in, because they position themselves as sort of a very front edge company, sort of in front of where the current body of evidence is, by using these new products that people haven't heard of and that sound really exciting. Another technique that pseudoscientists will use is they'll tend to extrapolate data to contexts that are not appropriate. And I'll give you one example for one of the products that I talked about in the review, which was their AMP-V products. And one of the main ingredients in that product, which is supposed to have some of the main benefits of the product itself, is CLA, conjugated linoleic acid.
Man, I remember taking CLA freaking back in like circa 2010, and I thought it was like, man, you got to have your CLA if you want to, lose fat. And man, the amount of freaking money I would have spent on that anyway.
That's a really good point. Like, a few people have sort of criticized my sort of speaking up about ATP and their products, and they'd be like, why do you even fucking care about it? Like, it doesn't matter if people want to like there's no downside. Like, people are spending a shitload of money on this stuff. Like, like I saw one of their ATP stacks was like 3 products was selling. Like, this was a sale, selling for like $290 for like a month supply. Like people are spending like a massive amount of money that could be spent on other better things. So when people say like, oh, like, why do you even care about it? Like, I'd like to help these people, because most of the time, like, the consumers who are buying these products, they're just not armed with the knowledge to sort of discriminate between fact and fiction when it comes to the claims that the ATP are making. And if I can help them and see sort of, or maybe like maybe this $290 stack isn't justified. It isn't going to give you much benefits. If I can save the money and like I'd do that. Like that's a motive for me. So when people say like, why do you even care about it? Like the financial investment that people are making on this is extraordinary. So going back to the CLA, so I think it was early 2000s. There was a bunch of rat studies where they gave them a pretty hefty dose of CLA, and they saw that sort of the rats that were supplemented versus the rats that were supplemented with placebo. The rats taking the CLA lost like something like 40 to 50% more fat. Like we're talking like outrageous more amounts of more fat loss. And so obviously then we're like, oh well, humans need to be supplementing with CLA for fat loss too. And like that's a reasonable conclusion to make. But when we saw CLA tested in humans, we saw that the fat loss effects of CLA were absolutely marginal, were like almost insignificant. So it was clear that sort of there was some sort of physiological difference with the response to CLA in rodents versus humans. And it's very unlikely that humans are going to get much benefit, if any. Now, what ATP do remarkable fat loss benefits with taking CLA, and that's just an example of sort of them extrapolating to an inappropriate situation.
Yeah, and I think it's not only CLA that these, extrapolations are made. It occurs with quite a number of the ingredients within their product, and you also found that some of the studies they used to reference certain ingredients didn't exist, or you couldn't find them.
Yeah, so they have like on their website they have sort of product pages where they will explain a little bit about the product and then they'll explain the benefits, and then they'll have a bunch of citations below that are supposed to sort of back up the claims and statements that they're making in regards to the product. And when I went through the reference list, there was a bunch of studies that just had no applicability to sort of the product or the claims that they're making whatsoever. And on some of the product pages, I couldn't see any referenced articles in relation to the product that I was talking about at all. Now, this is a massive problem because to the general consumer who's probably not going to open up these studies on PubMed and give them a read-through, they go through the claims and then they get to the references and they see 20 studies listed and they think, whoa, like look at all the science behind this product. Like this must be legit. And a lot of people aren't sort of they like, I understand they probably don't have the time to look into this sort of stuff, but it's quite a shady technique, and yeah, I have issues with that because it feels like it's manipulating the consumer.
Mm-hmm. It's ethically, flat out wrong. It's not only a misapplication of real science, it's not even focusing on the fringes. It's deception, and that's fraudulent behavior, which would warrant, and I guess this sort of leads to ATP Science's concerns. If they were to be investigated and found to be deceiving consumers, consumers could pursue legal action. Claiming, some form of damages, if they're unjustly, affected by purchasing these supplements. But I guess I'd like to sort of cover what the current situation within Australia is surrounding the regulation of supplements and the marketing claims of supplement companies. Are you familiar with the process and the regulations surrounding that?
Not too much, but I know that sort of a lot of these companies they get the get out of jail free card by putting a little statement on their products saying sort of these statements haven't been reviewed by the FDA. Now, that sort of gives them a little bit of free range to be able to essentially say what they want. Now, the issue, the major issue is that not only ATP Science, but many other supplement companies, they're making blatant statements that have not been evidenced by the literature. Now, I'm not sure. I don't fully understand sort of the legal processes behind it, but all I can see is that there's very little. The companies aren't getting checked on what they say, and it's an extremely unregulated industry. And I'm not sure sort of how we'd be able to progress with more regulation. I think it would be great if, and that's not to say that all sort of supplement companies are unethical and sort of trying to peddle sort of pseudo-scientific products. Like I've since sort of talking about the potential ATP science trial, I've had 2 supplement companies that have contacted me and said, hey, like it would be great if you could test one of our products. Like we're confident in it and we'd like to see if it works. Like independently, they have nothing to do with it. Like they fund it, but they have nothing. They have no control of what the results are and the findings. Now, like that shows that like there's good people in the supplement industry that like they truly believe in their products, and that's the way to go about it. That's why I have a little bit of issue with ATP, not only not wanting to sort of fund independent tests of their products itself. Now, it doesn't need to be by me. It could be any other research lab. That would be great. I'd have no issues with that. But they're also going a step further to sort of try and throw in a few little roadblocks to deter a study that I've been proposing. And the conclusion that I'm sort of making is, well, if they really had complete faith in their products, I'm unsure why they'd be so. I'm unsure why they'd be so against sort of having this trial go forwards. So yeah, there are good companies out there that actually like they want to take a sort of proactive step in getting their products tested and things like that. But yeah, it's extremely unregulated industry, and unfortunately, I think there are a few unethical companies out there, and they'll make bold statements that haven't been verified by science. And until we get either more laboratories and more scientists testing these products, which is difficult in itself because obviously you need funding, and if the company's not going to pay for itself, then where are you going to get the money to run the study? So it sort of runs around in circles a little bit. Companies don't want to do it; they don't want to pay for it, so there's no money to do the studies anyway. But what I'm hoping is that if the ATP study can go forward, that it's going to encourage some more ethical behaviour by other supplement companies, and then they might be sort of more inclined to get their studies, because like what would be better marketing to sort of have your product tested and show that the claims matched up with the results in a scientific trial. There's no better marketing than that. And like I have frustration in that companies are willing to spend hundreds of $1,000s on sort of these sponsored athletes and things like that, but they're not willing to sort of put $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000 towards sort of actually getting their products itself tested to show that they work. So that's my frustration at the moment, as well as a frustration that sort of the supplement industry as a whole is quite unregulated.
Yeah, I think the fact that independent testing of a supplement, could be something that occurs through both crowdfunding as well as funding from supplement companies, will just hold all supplement companies to a higher, standard, and that's only good for the consumer and the supplement company. But I think the incessant roadblocks and obstacles that ATP Science are trying to put in front of you is evidence of them not wanting their product tested and potentially being fearful of it not, matching up to the claims that they're making. Well, at least it seems that way. And I guess, do you want to talk about the study that you are proposing, to test their supplements?
Yeah, so can't speak too much about it, but we're hoping to test one of their fat loss creams, and sort of the trial structure that sort of we've proposed is to be randomised, double-blind, controlled. Now, I've even sort of I can appreciate the fact that ATP might be of the perspective that sort of Jackson is biased and he's going to want the results to sort of go one way or something, even though like I stand with nothing to gain from the results going one way or the other. So the double blind nature of that sort of protects against sort of that
bias,
issue.
yeah.
And I've even got I've got two other researchers who have put their hand up to say they're willing to be involved with the study. And I'm going to make sure that they're more hands-on with the data collection itself. And I'll sort of just see the results later on. And I'll be involved with the manuscript preparation and the planning and all things like that. But in terms of sort of administering the treatments, I'm going to leave that up to the other people just so it looks really clean. So double blind essentially means that the participant or the investigator don't know which treatment the participant is getting. So in just basic terms, an example would be for one of their fat loss creams, one participant is getting the actual product, one participant is getting a sham cream to rub. And then we standardize a diet for all participants. So let's give an example, like a 10% calorie deficit. And then after 8 weeks, we can see we've got an ultrasound, so we can quite accurately measure subcutaneous fat thickness. And one of the claims of this fat loss cream is that it directly targets subcutaneous adipose tissue. So at the end of 8 weeks or something like that, we can have a pre and a post, and we will be able to compare if the reduction. So because they're in a caloric deficit, we'd expect to see a little bit of reduction in fat thickness in both groups. But if the ATP product was effective, then we'd expect to see a greater reduction in thickness in the group that's actually taking the product versus the group that's just rubbing on a sham cream twice a day.
Awesome. And I guess what are the potential limitations of this outside of bias, dietary reporting, all those sorts of things? What do you foresee to be a potential counter argument to any potential findings that demonstrate the cream is not effective in reducing subcutaneous fat that ATP science could use? What are some of the limitations that they might be inclined to use as evidence that the study was flawed, essentially?
They could say we don't have enough people, which is sort of the first port of call with limitations, which is why sort of this study is predicated a little bit of how much funding we can raise for it, because obviously the more money we can get, the more product we can buy, the more participants, more tests we can run.
If you want to fund, guys, I'll put the link in the description box below. I think we're all good to do that. Is that fine for the crowdfunding? Cool.
Yeah,
link in the description box
the
below.
crowdfunding is the thing that's finally got the approval from the university. Awesome. Thankfully, it was a little bit shaky at the start, but it's good to go now. So hopefully we can get a decent number of people. Recruitment shouldn't be a problem. And then another limitation which I've been thinking a little bit about is sort of the potential for individual differences. Like we know that sort of people respond differently to certain treatments, and there's the classic, oh, well, it worked for me, but it might not work for someone, which is why I've actually been thinking I could, like this trial hasn't been confirmed yet or anything like that. We still need to get ethics approval, and we need to get sort of approval from the Commonwealth and things like that to run a study like this. But what we could actually do is potentially have each participant act as their own control. So we could switch it up a little bit. So everything the same, but let's say we chose like a stubborn area, like their hammies or something like that for fat, or let's just say the glutes. And so we had left glute, right glute. each person rubs their left glute with an active cream. Now they won't know what the cream is. It'll just be in a jar with like letter A on it or something, and it'll just be put letter A on your left glute twice a day. So they're putting on left glute twice a day, and then on their right glute they're putting tub B, but tub B is just sort of a vitamin E cream or some sort of inactive product. They put that on their right glute, and then that would account for any individual responses. So they wouldn't be able to say, oh, well, our product's not going to work for everybody, but it works for some people, because it's very clear that if we're not seeing any differences between left and right glute, well then what would be the point of taking the product itself? So that's a potential limitation that we could fix up there.
Very cool. Very cool. And I guess, in terms of your recent, communications with ATP Science, other podcasts, they've been on a podcast, I believe. I'm not sure if that's been released yet.
It has, yeah.
I'll link that in the description box below. I'm going to go watch that. What has been the overall, consensus, on their part, when they've outwardly spoken, on public forums, whether it's the podcast, social media, we've seen in a couple of groups, people from ATP Science have sort of, engaged in comments, when people were sharing your article, and they never really addressed anything that was actually said. It was very much, dodging and weaving from what I could see. But what's your overall consensus of how they've responded outside of trying to, protect their supplement from being investigated, through your research?
Yeah. So my number one frustration is that as soon as the initial article was released, before we'd done any podcast or anything like that, I said publicly that if ATP or their science team disagreed with any of the statements that I made in my article, I'd happily have a live discussion with them on a podcast or something like that, because I think that would be really good. Then I had the podcast with it's called Perth Fit Fam, and
Shout
we
out
spoke.
Perth Fit Fam.
Yep.
Is Jerry Lee G? Is she in the collective of Perth Fit Fam? Hashtag.
Yeah, she's co-owner of Perth Fit Fam. So we did.
Shout out to Jerry Lee G. She's going to be wrapped.
Best day of her life. So yeah, we did the podcast with Perth Fit Fam, and that went quite public. Now, still, I hadn't received any personal contact from ATP in regards to anything that I'd said sort of in the article or on the podcast. Then what they did was they contacted Brendan, who's the owner of Perth Fit Fam, and they flew him over to Brisbane to do a response podcast. Now,
damn, I should have
my issues with that was that they'd be willing to spend money to fly a guy over to speak to a guy who's nothing against Brendan, but probably not qualified to be able to sort of analyze anything that was said sort of live in a podcast. It probably just doesn't hit. No discredit to him. He just probably doesn't have the scientific knowledge and education to sort of have a debate with them. And he was sort of he was been a neutral party the whole time. Now, instead of talking to me, they'd fly him over and speak to him, and that was a little bit frustrating to me, because it was sort of like, what's the point if you're not willing to speak to me? And I listened to the podcast, their response podcast, and a lot of the listeners have been quite frustrated with it. You can just go look through social media sort of comments and things like that. A lot of people are quite frustrated, and they're frustrated because they rambled quite a bit, and they probably only addressed maybe 5% of sort of some of the arguments that I'd made in my article on the podcast. And some of the things they addressed was that I'd referred to one of the ingredients as coleus forscoli, and they sort of said they said that, oh well, if you do a search on coleus forscoli, you don't see any studies, but if you do it on its other name, forscolin, there's a whole lot of other studies, and that's just not correct. The International Olympic Committee, that they've already done a review on coleus forscoli or forscolin, whatever you want to call it, and they've already said that there's not enough research to be able to justify this as a fat loss aid. They also nitpicked, saying that when I referred to when I did an analysis of their grapefruit, or one of their products that included grapefruit seed oil, they said, well, Jackson analyzed grapefruit. No,
Is that
sorry.
made by Kai Green?
Yeah, yeah. It's the same. It's the same grapefruit that he
The
used.
exact one. Well, that's why it's anabolic, bro.
Sorry, I believe it was grapefruit peel extract, and I did an analysis of whole grapefruit, grapefruit extract, and grapefruit seed extract. So they were all, because I was looking into the studies on this, and I couldn't find any studies on sort of the peel extract itself. So I was just like, okay, what's the second best we can get? It's just the other forms of grapefruit. And they said, oh, well, you can't talk about the other forms of grapefruit because ours is different, and ours is specific to the grapefruit peel, but there's no evidence, there's no science on that ingredient anyway. So that was sort of a moot point. And the other issue they raised, which I spoke about before, is in relation to the collagen studies, and I spoke about my doubts still about that study. They said the study does exist and that it's going to come out eventually, and that it's completely legit, and that it wasn't their fault that it wasn't published. It was sort of the fault of sort of the other parties that were involved, and that may be the case, but I'd really like to have a close look at the study, because I'm unsure why they'd be able to get such novel results that just don't line up with the other collagen protein research that we do have.
Right. So, yeah, I guess our next move will be to tee up a roundtable discussion with ATP Science, and hopefully get you and those involved, the higher ups of ATP Science, to have a formal discussion about this, and hopefully flesh it out and see if they can defend the claims they make with their products.
And just jumping in, like, some people have said, well, having a discussion with Jackson would be no benefit to ATP. It would be of extreme benefit to them if they were able to sort of substantiate their claims and sort of bring back some credibility that the consumers are wanting. Because at the moment, just from looking at the social media comments, that there are some now doubts around some of these products. And if ATP were able to have sort of a really logical, well thought out discussion with me, and that they'd perhaps be able to sort of provide some more info that perhaps I'm missing, or some perhaps I'm interpreting the data a little bit differently to them, and perhaps they'd be able to more effectively solidify their position. That would be of a huge benefit to not only them but also their consumers, because it would bring back sort of a lot more confidence to their company and their buyers.
Yeah, I definitely think a lot of people misinterpret like what a debate is versus an argument where there's insults thrown, just poor logical tactics used to defend an argument. For you guys listening, if you watch any debate, the value for an onlooker is that it affords you guys an opportunity to make a side-by-side comparison of the validity and perceived accuracy of both parties' contentions and their position on a topic. And when you witness a debate, you're presented information. Obviously the parties in the debate go back and forth and have a verbal rally, arguing their contentions and refuting the proposed contentions of the other party. But you can make your own informed decision as to who's presenting the evidence that is supported by science. And I think the value of these sorts of debates, not only have we seen them play a pivotal role in resolving many issues humanity has faced, but they help us develop our knowledge, because we can see where people agree, we can see where they disagree. We understand their premises, their assumptions. We find gaps in what we do and don't know, and it elucidates areas for further investigation and questioning. And I think that is something that anyone who values science should be interested in. And given that science is a term used in this supplement company's name. Hopefully they value the true meaning of science and not just the use of science, when it suits them, and twisting and distorting it to, use it for their own benefit, to deceive and obviously engage in potentially unethical behavior. So, yeah, we would love to see that debate happen, and we'll hopefully get in contact with ATP Science, and Jackson can, go up against it and see where, the differences lie. But
Dude, that was dope. We need to clip that. That was fucking awesome.
We'll clip it.
Yeah.
So moving forward, Jackson, what have you got in the works at the moment? We have a study that you, Eric Helms, James Krieger, Martin Ruffalo from JPS, and myself are working on. Hopefully going to be conducted later this year. Do you want to talk to that, and then anything else you've got in the works?
Yeah, so it's essentially going to be a follow-up to some of the diet break research that we've got going on at the moment. And it's based on the rationale that the leaner an athlete is, the more potential there is for sort of physiological and psychological benefits from diet breaks. Now, the rationale is based on the fact that we know that some of the adaptive responses to energy restriction or dieting get more severe as a person diets for longer and as they get leaner. For example, we know that as a person gets leaner, they become more susceptible to muscle losses. But whereas you compare that to an overweight person, sometimes they won't lose any lean mass or any muscle losses whatsoever. We also see that as a person gets really lean, that they'll see sort of the significant impairments to anabolic hormone profiles, where you compare that to sort of an overweight or general weight dieter. They start losing a bit of weight. Sometimes they actually see improvements in testosterone and other anabolic markers. We also know that as an athlete gets really lean, they become more susceptible to injury and illness. They become more irritable. Their reflexes slow down. So what we think is that because sort of these adaptive effects are becoming so severe, there's potential for sort of this influx of calories coming in from a diet break. It could potentially sort of restore the system more potently than sort of in the context of sort of a person who's only been dieting for a little bit and sort of perhaps not very lean. Now, so if that was the case, then we'd be able to say, okay, well, for a person who's just starting their diet phase, who's sort of got a lot of fat to lose, perhaps they might not need refeeds or diet breaks right off the bat. Perhaps they only need to be brought in sort of the middle of the diet phase or sort of to the latter end of the phase. And perhaps that might mean that refeeds and diet breaks become more frequent the sort of leaner the person gets. We just don't know yet. Like I said, there's theoretical rationale, but it hasn't been tested yet. So what we're proposing is we're going to recruit a bunch of natural bodybuilders from different stages of the contest prep. So what that means is sort of some are going to be dieting for a little bit, some are going to be dieting for a while, some are going to be sort of not so lean, some are going to be very lean. We're hoping to get a spectrum. And what we're going to do is we're going to put them on a diet break protocol, a similar protocol that's used in my ice cap trial, which is essentially 7 days at predicted maintenance calories. Now we're going to test their resting metabolic rate, their mood state, some subjective ratings of their performance and their recovery at baseline. Then we're going to start them on our diet break protocol, and we're going to retest these variables after 1, 2, and 3 days at maintenance and 7 days at maintenance. Now, with that data, what it's going to show us is it's going to show us, do we see sort of more positive effect in the leaner people? For example, do we see greater improvements in mood state? Do we see sort of greater improvements sort of in recovery and performance in the leaner people when we give them a diet break versus sort of the not so lean people? And what it's also going to show us is it's going to be the first study to ever show a time course response in relation to sort of some of this normalization of these dieting variables. For example, it could well be the case that sort of a 1 day or 2 day refeed at maintenance is not enough of a potent stimulus to sort of trigger some improvements in mood or sort of reduce stress or training stress or something like that. But once you get to sort of day 3 at maintenance or day 7 maintenance, maybe we actually start seeing some really significant turn back then. So that we're going to see a lot of really cool stuff from this study. And we've got Krieger handling analysis, so we know that analysis is going to be super tight.
Yeah, and this all sort of stemmed from a discussion we had in Perth at the Optimizing Body Composition seminar, and yeah, it's going to be quite novel, and I think the utility of this study for coaches who are helping people get extremely lean, cannot be overstated. Like, we're going to see, the time courses for different, metrics, and when refeed and diet break strategies start to have, quite a significant effect on those, metrics. So, yeah, the way that I sort of perceive it at the moment is, we're going to hopefully find out if, 24, 48-hour refeed can improve, perceived stress, fatigue, and mood state, but there's no significant change in resting metabolic rate. We can use that information in practice if we have someone who is just really irritable, they're not recovering well, they might not have, metabolically adapted, so to speak, to the diet. We can just give them a 24 or 48-hour refeed. In comparison, if someone started to see the onset of like metabolic rate slowing down, and they're not losing fat, all those sorts of things, and this study finds that, hey, only after 7 days do we see this increase in resting metabolic rate, you would give them a 7-day diet break rather than a 72, 48-hour, 24-hour. So I think it's going to be really useful, for practitioners and athletes. And I'm pretty excited to see the results.
Yeah, man, I'm so excited because there's so many cool things that we could potentially pick out here that just haven't been shown before by anyone.
Yeah, very cool. Anything else that you've got in the mix?
Nah, man, hands are full at the moment.
Hands are full. You've got,
I'm should be getting my last participant for my massive diet break study in this Thursday, which means touch wood, from Thursday should be 16 weeks till data collection's completed, which will be so good because that has been a slog.
Man, I'm very excited for you, and I'm sure many of the listeners are looking forward to seeing what you find, and obviously the furtherance of diet break research is only a good thing. One last question I have for you. I'm not sure if you heard Menno Henselmann's recent podcast on Revive Stronger. He was asked a question about diet breaks, and he essentially proposed that he doesn't utilize them in practice, and I'm paraphrasing here, so don't hold me to a high degree of accuracy in getting his beliefs and statements correct. But essentially, he said that he doesn't use diet breaks because there's no evidence supporting improvements in resting metabolic rate, and that they often only increase the length of a dieting phase. What would, in a couple of minutes, what would your refutal to that be?
I'd say just from the presentations that I've given with you, I think we'd probably agree that the studies that I've shown do show some pretty, at least from the studies that have sort of contrasted a period of sort of moderate caloric deficit with a higher feeding period, whether it's a refeed or diet break, at least in those sort of the protocols that are applicable to sort of athlete diets, I think we'd probably agree that we've seen some pretty decent sort of benefits with those dietary regimens, and almost all of this. I think we have probably 6 or 7 really solid studies that have sort of these mod IR diets, so moderate intermittent energy restriction. Probably 6 or 7 really solid studies that have outperformed your traditional continuous energy restriction program. So I find it a little. I don't agree with it because I think from analysis of the evidence, I think there's definitely merit to sort of refeeds and diet breaks, and like the Matador study, which had 150 people with 2-week diet breaks, they showed better fat loss, less reduction in metabolic rate. They showed less regain post diet compared to the standard continuous diet. So. And that was a really tight study that had a whole lot of funding. So I'd have a little bit hard pressed to agree with him there. Like, nothing against Menno. I reckon he's a crazy smart dude. He's smarter than me, but
I think it'd make for an interesting debate and podcast.
Yeah, did he justify his stance? Like,
Yeah, he did. I can't remember exactly what he said. He did reference Matador. He was essentially stating that they only increase the length of the dieting phase, and that for people wanting to lose weight, it's probably better to adopt lifestyle approaches rather than relying on diet breaks to help you achieve your goals. Essentially,
Yeah, like that second comment's valid. It's probably there's a little bit similar comment Mike Israel made on a podcast recently where he said like it was quite funny. He was like, "Your whole fucking life's been a diet break. You don't need a diet break if like if you're referring to sort of the general pop dieter who's potentially not sort of these crazy levels of leanness, not trying to get to 6% body fat or whatnot." He was sort of the stance that sort of if you're a normal person, perhaps just you don't need diet breaks and that they're not going to have much merit. But I'd also disagree with that from the standpoint that sort of the moderate intermittent diets that we do have, which have used refeeds and diet breaks, typically they're not on athletes. Typically they're on normal people who are training and sort of sometimes overweight. And in those populations, we do see benefits with the diet breaks versus the continuous dieting protocols. So, yeah, it's tough because we don't have a whole lot of research, but I think from the research that we do have, I disagree somewhat. And at least when my trial comes out, sort of whenever it comes out, it's on athletes, it's using diet breaks. We should be able to speak a little bit more confidently if they do sort of show some benefits over our standard diet approach.
and I'm sure at a very surface level, based on obviously my relaying of Menno's position, it could seem that there's two polarizing opinions. Like Menno doesn't believe in diet breaks. That's a very sort of superficial way to look at that statement. And
I'm sure he's got his reasons.
And Jackson supports diet breaks, but I'm sure once you sort of dig beyond that, and this is pretty important stuff for the listeners, and you look to the nuance, there'd be a lot more agreement between both of you than sort of what would meet the eye, when you just sort of take these comments in isolation, without any context or further exploration, of the reasons why those comments were made in the first place. So I think that could make for another useful podcast. We've got to get you and Menno on to talk about diet breaks. That'd be cool.
For sure, man. That'd be awesome.
Easy. Well, Jackson, the people punching peacock, we call him Triple P here at JPS. He thinks he's a sushi eating god because he towed me and you didn't towel Lyndon up, but you towed me up in a sushi eating contest in Perth a few months back. Where can people find you? What can they do to help further your research and support science?
Best place to get me is Instagram. So anything I'm doing sort of in my lab, anything in regards to research, as well as sort of any research that's coming out unrelated to me that sort of in the nutritional scene I'll be posting about. So best place to keep up to date with me is there. That's just at Jackson Peos. If you're a little bit more nerdy, my formal research publications are on ResearchGate, just Jackson Peos again. And in terms of contributions, as I said, the ATP science, the supplement trial that we're planning to do at the moment, or that we're proposing, is in a crowdfunding stage. If we can gather some more funds from that, it's going to bring a better trial, and sort of I think it's going to be a really worthwhile investment if you are a consumer that cares about this sort of stuff, because I think it's going to encourage a lot more ethical practice from supplement companies when we start seeing things like this happen.
Awesome, man. Thank you very much for coming on, and I'll probably slide into your DMs in a couple of hours anyway and
always a pleasure.
Tease you for something.
As usual.